Welcome Exiles to another update to the Boneshatter Jug. Now this update is going to be not as extensive because I really didn't change too many gear pieces, but I did make one big change, and that's Abyssus. Which I gotta be honest, I wasn't expecting to end up doing this, but what happened was while we were mapping today, we had a temp chains Drox. And I slapped Drox a lot, and I got all the way up to 20 stacks of trauma thanks to temp chains extending the duration. And I thought to myself, we're sustaining this, maybe we can afford to go for an Abyssus, which is huge damage. It gives a lot of phys, it gives a lot of crit multi, it gives some okay attributes, the armor's nice, but it has the huge downside of making us take increased phys. This change makes us deal a good amount more damage. The downside is we take a lot more phys. For the most part, while I've been mapping with this, I don't feel like it's too big of an issue. I still feel like we're very tanky against 10, up to about 10 trauma stacks. Once we get to 15, we start to maybe outscale our sustain with trauma, but we still kind of scale it. We can still kind of sustain it. The issues I have with it are when we are in vulnerability maps or really high damage maps. The downside of us sustaining a little bit worse means that the monsters hit that much harder because we sustain less because we are taking more damage from trauma. Most case scenarios, it works out fine. We just slap harder, we have way more damage, and it's Gucci. But when we are in high damage mod maps, which is what you got to do when you're trying to break through red tier maps, you have to val them, you have to basically get as much quant as you can, so you're running really dangerous mods, and that stuff can feel bad. So in the perspective of running a bunch of dangerous maps mods in red maps, I feel like Abyssus is maybe too squishy. But outside of that, if we can kind of avoid really deadly mods, honestly, the extra damage is totally worth it. And for the most part, it isn't that big of a downside because we do sustain most of the self-damage pretty well, I would say. So that's the big change we made. I don't know if I'm going to stick with it, but for right now I'm leaning towards yes, I'm going to stick with it. I think the damage is going to help us crack into the end game, and really the extra self damage from it isn't that bad, except for the scenario where we're running less recovery rate maps or vulnerability. Stuff like that is where it feels bad. I will say this, because we are leaning into Abyssus, I really have gone a lot more into crit than I really thought I was at the start of this. And because of that, I was thinking, you know what, too passive. I wasn't really planning to be this invested into crit, but at this point, just sitting in our hideout, our crit on our Boneshatter is, it's 56% chance with 380 crit multi. The reality is, we're a crit build at this point. Once we start using our Diamond Flask, that takes us up to 68%. If I add in an Assassin's Mark cast when damage taken, that's probably going to take us closer to 80% crit chance. Our crit is really starting to become a thing, and because of that, one of the changes I decided to make tonight was to change from the 2 passives to an Alira, the Bandit Kill Alira bonus, where it gives you 20 crit multi and 15 all res. Unfortunately, this is a bit expensive because regret orbs are not cheap right now, because it requires 20 regret orbs and 1 intelligent amulet. You vendor that to a vendor. It should show up a book in the vendor window, which will allow you to switch from 2 passives to Alira's bonus, which is the 20 crit multi and all res. This also has the side benefit of making our res a little bit easier to fix. Our res isn't completely perfect, given we swapped out our helmet. Our res is looking rougher. Eventually, we'll swap out our gloves. We'll be swapping out our Lori's lantern. Stuff like that is going to help us fix our reses even more. But for right now, we're kind of at a real questionable spot, and I've been a little bit lazy about gearing. Now, another thing I just noticed I forgot to mention was I did get a 6-link astral plate. This for me is an in-between step going to the Iron Fortress. Ideally, I want to get either Pillar of the Cage God 6-link or Iron Fortress 6-link before I make the switch. The Astral Plate was a nice, easy in-between step because the Celestial Justicar div cards, which give you a 6-link Astral Plate, were only about 10 C a card, and you only need 6 of them to get a full set and a 6-link Astral. So that's what I ended up doing, and I chucked a couple essences at this. I would recommend doing life-based essences, strength-based essences, armor-based essences. Any of those should work pretty decently, and just throws a couple of those at it until you get decent armor plus life and maybe a res or 2, and then maybe a res you can craft or armor you can craft. Something like that is what I would shoot for. Just kind of, you know, just something to hold us over until we can afford getting a 6-link pillar or a 6-link fortress. and at that point, I'll be more okay switching into the Fortress, because I started using the 6-link, and now I don't want to let it go because I like the 6-link damage and whatnot. So that's a thing. Another thing we did is we also started using Ancestral Call. I've been noticing our attack speed is starting to get to the point where we don't keep up with it with just Ancestral Warcry. So I've been using Ancestral Call for mapping, and then I've been swapping in a Endurance Charge on melee stun for single target. This might not be the best support. Again, I probably should look a little bit harder at my support options and min-max it a little bit more, but it's a pretty decent support, so that's what I'm using. So that's the main changes I made to gearing. For our passive tree, I did make a little bit of a change here where I went for Smashing Strikes. This gives us melee strike range, a little bit more crit. That's one of the things I went for. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I did change a Might of the Meek at some point. That was last one, but I don't think I mentioned it in the video. It's really high value here, and it's actually really quite nice value with the accuracy crit nodes we get here. So those are the main passives I ended up grabbing, and that's what the tree looks like now. Oh, almost forgot, we anointed Ophidian Aim. This is a pretty cheap anoint. It's a clear, a teal, and a crimson, and it gives us a lot of value: attack speed, overwhelm phys, crit chance, accuracy. Really a nice cheap anointment, and I switched it out for beef recently because oils aren't too expensive. And yeah, I think that covers up the main changes. The real bulk of the portion of what we've been doing today has been mapping. You'll see we're going into our last set of Conquerors until we get our Cirrus fight. This is the 5th set of Watchstones. I am on the journey towards progressing it, and I just went and bought a T15 to try to help me sustain these maps and fight through it. So I'm going to showcase you guys this T15. It has -12 max, which is a really deadly mod. Good chance we might die to some elemental damage here. We're just going to see what we can do. Hopefully we can drop some maps, and that is the showcase I got for you guys. So I'm going to try not to die in it, but -max, it is not a forgiving mod. Another thing I've noticed when I've been doing these red maps is, man, the curses are brutal. Vulnerability, temp chains, not having curse removal, it is very unforgiving, I would say. So that's just a heads up for you guys to prepare yourself when you get into red maps. Be wary of curses, be wary of less recovery, no regen stuff. You can run a less recovery or a no regen by itself. It's doable, but it's uncomfortable, I would say. It's uncomfortable. There's a good chance you could die in a moment of weakness where you're not being careful, not paying attention. I don't know why I'm reading a bunch of corrupted items. They're probably, all garbage, so no point in looking at that. Ooh. Actually, I don't know if that was worth it or not. But anyways, just gonna keep going through, slapping the grand monsters. The lag there. But as you can see, we're still one-tapping monsters, even in red maps. It's pretty good damage-wise for clear with Ancestral Call and whatnot. The single target on bosses you'll see is, I don't know, it's not like anything special, but it's good enough so far. We haven't had any problems really with bosses. The main problem we've had is running really dangerous map mods and biting off more than we can chew, is basically what it would be. I don't like these snakes. When I try to do these things with snakes, they're really, really pretty annoying. What do I want to start with? Let's just go with the artifacts one over here, and then we'll work our way around. I'm going to avoid the no leech one because since it's -max, it might be worth it. I haven't been really thinking about these things till we've been getting to these dangerous maps. Bleeding and poison, honestly, nah. Bleeding and poison. Bleeding, I don't think used to be that big of a deal up until once we got Abyssus, then bleeding I started to feel a little bit more, and I've been less interested in engaging with bleed stuff. Mostly because I ran a bunch of vulnerability maps back to back to back, and they were a little bit tilting because vulnerability plus Abyssus, that's when Abyssus starts to feel bad. Most mapping scenarios, Abyssus doesn't feel too bad, but when we're in a scenario where there's even more increased phys due to vulnerability, then that's when I'm like, okay, I don't know. That's where I would have second guesses for Abyssus. Like, the damage is great, and for the most part, it's not too big of a deal. It doesn't hurt us too much. But when it comes to vulnerability maps where we get even more increased phys taken, then we start to notice it, and it's like, I don't know. But then again, even in a vulnerability map without Abyssus, we probably still wouldn't enjoy it, just because vulnerability does not feel great in general, because it makes monsters way more likely to inflict bleeding, and bleeding is a deadly mod these days. I mean, it's always been a tilting mod, but it's harder to mitigate these days, at least, because you can't just run a flask that has 100% uptime that just negates bleed entirely. So. I'm actually kind of sad right now because I spent I spent like 20C buying this map and getting a cartographer's scarab, and we haven't dropped a single map. So after this, I'm gonna have to go back and buy another map to try to hopefully sustain. So this is probably a best case scenario in terms of bossing goes, because they're all stacked up on next to each other. We get a little bit extra damage there for overlapping hits and stuff. But as you can see, still works fine for T15. Bit bummed out I didn't get a map here, but that's the update for the character. Sorry I haven't done more changes to the gear. It's more or less a matter of there's not really many 6-link pillars or 6-link iron hearts on the market, and I'm kind of waiting for that to do a big gear change, but maybe I should stop stalling and start spending my own jewelers and fusing, just trying to link something up. Anyways, that's the video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, you guys have an excellent rest of your day. Peace out.